Hi, everyone. I'm Dima. We have our guest Ihor here, Dvoretskiy from, he's traveling from Ukraine and going back tonight. So wanted to set this up. We had a keynote a couple of days ago at the Detroit Kubernetes Con where you presented, and this is feels like a very interesting experience in that respect. So wanted to get you out here to meet with the community. Hopefully there's going to be more people as well joining, but just wanted to have a conversation and really ask you a couple of questions, right? Like a little bit about you to introduce. You're an IT professional. You are, currently engaged in active duty in Ukrainian military. And there's probably a lot more to your, personality, but just wanted to start with a question is, how did you get into IT?
Into IT, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's complicated question. I mean, like, I always had a passion to IT and to tech and to all that stuff, kind of like this, not all this interesting stuff that you can play with. I would say like kind of like from the career standpoint, from kind of like the professional standpoint, my first job was in tech. It was not like really in tech. Like I was not like a super fancy programmer for the first time at the first job in my life. I was just one of the guys who was working for the local ISPs in my city, and I was like one of those guys who was focused on servicing the customers and basically visiting the, let's say, apartments or their houses and like making the internet happen. So it was my first job, and like an official. I was 17 years old. So
you brought people the internet.
Yeah, I brought people the internet. Yeah,
awesome.
But like later, so like in a few years, I've switched a few jobs after that. I used to work in the call centers, like of the mobile operators in Ukraine and the other ISP. Internet service providers in Ukraine, also like from the tech support side and all this stuff. I mean, like not too bad for the kind of like for the first tier jobs, like the lowest tier jobs. I mean, later I've switched to tech, so I switched to something like more intense, like more serious, with becoming a system administrator in one of the local banks in Ukraine. We used to be the kind of like the service administration unit with the call center of the bank, and I've been working there for almost 1.5 years. I realized that like at that point of time, the Ukrainian tech market, related to kind of like the Western customers and all that stuff was rapidly growing. And at that point of time, there've been like tons of opportunities to jump on one of the outsourcing or staffing companies that are offering their services to the Western customers and to the foreign customers. And given that like I had a feeling that my English is not so bad, I had a feeling that like I can combine my tech skills with kind of like the communication skills and like jump on that board. So I've switched to the company. It's one of the biggest outstaffing companies in Ukraine. It still does exist. I would say it's like in top 5 the biggest outsourcing outstaffing companies. I've been the junior DevOps engineer at that point of time. So I've been like mostly kind of like an assistant job to the more senior guys. But that was one of the points when I've been getting my first real experience with something serious.
And just to contextualize a little bit, you're from Ukraine, but where exactly in Ukraine were you? Like,
Yeah, so all these things have happened in my native city in Dnipro. So I'm from Dnipro, and like everything that I was just describing has happened in Dnipro, including the first job in the outstaffing company. At the same point of time, just like coincidentally happened that it was late 2013. Some serious stuff has been happening in Ukraine. I'm speaking about Maidan and all the related stuff, actually, because like not just Maidan was happening, but like some economical potential difficulties could happen. All this foreign relation stuff could happen, and so on. And the customer that I've been working for, like that customer, they decided to suspend the contract with that company I was working for, and I had to look for a new job. It was
they switched because they perceived the risks, the
yeah,
business risks
right,
were too
right,
high to
right.
continue the business. So,
yeah, so basically, like on one hand, they had to cut some of the expenses, and on the other hand, they've decided to cut these expenses in Ukraine because of the potential risks. So they would rather invest this money that they're saving to something different in like less risky areas or less risky offices. So the job was cut. I've been looking for a different job. It was late January 2014. And I've been looking for a new job. It was like pretty much hard to find, especially with my not so great experience at that point of time. So I've been still looking for the junior engineering level job. So I was not at that point of the career where like 10 companies are hunting for you. I was one of those guys who've been struggling with finding this one company that will accept my resume. And I realized that in my city, in Ihor, there are no companies where I might be interested in like continuing my career. None of these companies exist. There've been some offers from the truly boring companies, but I decided that I shouldn't go like that way. I should try more and like maybe find something different and something outside of my city as well. So I'm always fully open for location. And the obvious obvious choice for people from the cities like Dnipro in Ukraine is to move to Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, and like it's basically like it's the biggest city. There's tons of opportunities, tons of potential job offers, and so on. But unfortunately, I haven't received any good and valid job offers from Kyiv as well. At the same time, my company, like that staffing company, they had just signed up the new contract with the new customer. And that customer, it was the Swiss customer, but one of the founders was from had the territorial origin. And again, it was February 2014. It was almost March. And one of the hard requirements that guy set to that staffing company I'm working for, that they have to open the office in the Western Ukraine, because that company didn't have an office at that point of time. Just like I should have my team in the Western Ukraine, just because like my roots are here, and like I want to invest in the economy of the Western Ukraine through opening the office there and growing my team there. So basically, yeah. So they opened an office. They've started hiring people, and they realized that they have a guy from Dnipro who's like sitting on a bench, like waiting for the job offer. And they invited me, and I accepted the offer. Like I moved to Lviv. So they had. I have to clarify that they have opened the office in Lviv, not in Ternopil, just because Lviv is the biggest city, and like also like the tech market is a little bit more in a kind of better shape than in Ternopil. So I moved to Lviv at that point of time, and so I'm moving forward.
And this is where you currently live officially, right?
Yeah,
this is
right.
Gotcha. So as you know, you got into IT industry, and you, I think we're approaching to the timeline that I think you started with CNCF, the Cloud Native Foundation,
right? And
was that close? Is it 2015?
It was in 2017. But in 2015, I've started actually working closely with the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Just because like it's not about the foundation itself, it's more about the community that this foundation is building around the projects. So the biggest and kind of like the anchor project of the foundation is Kubernetes, which is one of the biggest and most notable open source projects in the entire world. And this project, it has been developed by Google in 2015. In 2015, they have donated this project to the Linux Foundation. And the Linux Foundation has decided to establish the brand new foundation specifically for Kubernetes and the related projects, just to kind of like to build the ecosystem around Kubernetes. Not to host Kubernetes as a single project, but to kind of build the ecosystem of the huge number of projects that are complementing each other and can make all this cloud native ecosystem being better. So it's not just the focus on a single project, it's like more focus on, again, like building the ecosystem. And since Kubernetes is an open source project, basically everyone can contribute to it. And at that point of time, I was working for a different company. It was a product company that was focused mostly on OpenStack. It's kind of like yet another open source tool for building clouds. That company was not interested in kind of using Kubernetes at that point of time, and so on. So like later they've switched to Kubernetes. It's almost every single company in this ecosystem, but like at that point of time, they've been considering Kubernetes as a boring project and like it's not worth their attention. However, as an individual, I was focused on Kubernetes because like I was interested in Kubernetes because like I've noticed that it's kind of well, it's a perspective project. So it's a project that you may kind of play with these days, and maybe in the future, maybe your current company or maybe your different company or like you just as an individual will benefit from this because for some reason I felt that Kubernetes is the future for the cloud technologies.
And so for maybe some people who are not, particularly super tech savvy, how would you describe what a Kubernetes is for a non-tech person?
Yeah, so Kubernetes is, well, it's a complex question. It's impossible to describe it into words. Yeah, so imagine that you have like tons of different applications that are running on the different hosts and the different computers like around the globe, let's say, in the different data centers in the different locations and so on. And to manage all of them, basically you have kind of like two options. You have to manage everything manually, or you may have one unified control system that will manage them all at the different scale, at different size, in the different locations and so on. And this is something that Kubernetes was designed for. So Kubernetes has its origins from Google, and Google's running the infrastructure. And Kubernetes is kind of like the container orchestration system. So it's focused on containers, like the small bundles of software that where something's packed inside, and it can be easily distributed from one host to another host. Like you can make some minor changes there by just rebuilding the container and so on. So it's like the container is kind of like the atomic unit of all this stuff. So yeah, like speaking about the origins of the project, it was born at Google, and Google is running the infrastructure at the highest scale like probably possible in the world. They have a system. It's called Borg, and it's kind of something like Kubernetes, but it's significantly tied to the internal systems of Google. So you cannot just use Borg with something else like outside of the Google internal systems. At the same time, a few engineers from Google, like in 2013, I believe, they've decided that the container ecosystem is rapidly growing, and the open source world needs something that will manage the containers at the higher scale. Again, like you were able to manage the containers on a single machine, for example, back in 2013, but it was impossible to manage like thousands and millions of machines at the global scale. So this is what Kubernetes was designed for. These engineers from Google, they've been inspired by Borg. They've re-implemented some of the ideas that have been incorporated into Borg, and they invented Kubernetes. It was back in 2014. Back in 2015, it was again like it was. So in 2014, this project was developed and open sourced. In 2015, the version 1.0 was released, kind of like the first milestone. And at the same point of time, it was donated to the Linux Foundation with the establishment of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation.
Interesting. So as it started developing, you realized the potential in this initiative.
Well, I haven't realized, I just felt.
Okay. Yeah. And so
like back in 2015.
Right. And then so you decided to move closer to it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how your engagement with the CNCF, the Cloud Native Foundation, came along. Yeah. And you started with them in 2017.
Right. Yeah. So basically, Kubernetes is not only about writing code. It's all about it's a huge open source project, even at that point of time when it was not so huge as today. And by consuming something, And if you're consuming this and you like what you like, you enjoy what you're consuming, you definitely want to give something back.
Mhm.
And if you're speaking about the open source projects, it's absolutely easy to contribute something back if you are skilled in one of the areas where you can contribute to.
Mhm.
So back in 2015, what was like late 2015, I've noticed a few issues with the Kubernetes documentation that had to be fixed by
Mhm.
someone,
Mhm.
but who owns the documentation? Like nobody knows. Like it was kind of like a few lines of text that had to be fixed, and basically those a few broken lines of text didn't allow me to deploy Kubernetes on my laptop. Let's say.
Mhm.
So I've noticed that there are some issues with documentation. This documentation has to be rewritten, like some of the bugs have to be fixed. So I decided just to kind of like fix the documentation, open the pull request on GitHub, and submit it. And that was my kind of like the first accepted contribution there.
So you took the active stance. If I see something broken,
Yeah.
let me try to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because more so for yourself first, right? But also it would benefit others as well.
Everyone, yeah,
Right.
sure.
So this is an interesting concept of open source technology, is that it's open to everyone to use, right? But as it's open to everyone, it needs to be developed. So
Yeah.
the whole culture of developing projects in an open way is a concept that's somewhat novel in software engineering. Well, I don't want to say novel because Linux has been around for ages and Unix as well, but that's how it's came about. And it's still developing as we've been at the conference,
Right.
and the conference was hosting 7,000 people, and there were
seven and a half,
yeah 7,500 people. So and there were hundreds probably of companies, commercial companies who were at the event to support the open source project. So it actually works for the commercial companies to invest their resources into open source project, because when you contribute, you get it back,
right?
And that's how the open source community works, develops, and thrives.
Yeah.
In general.
And for the commercial companies, it's definitely worth it investing their time and resources into contributing to the open source project.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're using this open source project for building your own products or for offering services, it will, for the final end, it will benefit your customers and your business.
Mm-hmm.
So it's way easier to contribute to the open source project rather than trying to fix something on your own. And if you're stuck there, so with the open source project, there will be always different people who may help you. There might be different commercial companies who are also building their products or offering services also based on the same subset of code.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are any issues there or any new feature that has to be developed, you will not rely on your own as if it would be with the closed source stuff.
Yeah. Understood. Okay. So, and as you know, you've been with CNCF for 5 years, and you've engaged this community. Let's maybe fast forward a little bit to how February 24th happened in Ukraine. How was your experience with how that, you as an IT professional, right? You're used to open source projects, collaboration, community, boom, the war hits.
Yeah.
What was your experience like?
Well, that was a terrible experience, obviously. So it was definitely not something that I'd like to happen once again in my life. So to be honest, just a couple days and couple weeks before February 24th has happened, all the shit that has happened that day. So I had a few options to flee out of Ukraine, kind of move somewhere, I don't know, to New York, for example, or somewhere else, basically anywhere in the world, and just hide from all that stuff. So I had a few serious rumors and calls from a few notable friends who definitely knew what's going next. and they kind of like told me that I have to go out at least temporarily, just kind of like to like we'll see how it goes, we'll see what will happen, but like for your own safety and for the safety of your family, you have to move like at least temporarily somewhere. However, I decided to refuse that offer, so I decided to stay in Ukraine and basically to kind of to have that experience that we all had on February 24th. The next step, I realized that I have to help my country somehow, and again, like considering multiple options what I can do there, I realized that I have also like different skills outside of tech itself. And in my case, that was the drone operator skill. Like I've been an avid hobbyist with drones for like 3 years, and this was something I felt that it could benefit potentially the armed forces of Ukraine or like other kind of like the military or paramilitary structures in Ukraine. And at some point of time, it was on February 26th or February 27th, so I decided to make it to the recruiting office of the Ukrainian army and to sign up for basically what I did. I was refused 3 times, just because they've been looking for someone experienced. Like I'm not an experienced guy in the army, but like hey folks, like I know drones. I kind of like we can do something with this. So yeah, like I was refused to the different structures a few times, and the final end was accepted to the territorial defense forces, and this is where I am these days. And yeah, so like basically, like since the day one, I was trying to be focused on drones. Obviously, since it's an army, so like you cannot do what you do all the time. So obviously, I cannot focus on the drones all the time. But this is something that I'm trying to focus the most. And in parallel, it was back in April, I believe, I realized that some small but notable community around drones is growing in Ukraine, the Victor drones community, and I realized that it's kind of like yet another story about me being involved in the community life. It's like it's kind of like coming back to 2015 or 2016 with my experience with another open source project with Kubernetes, and like how can I how can I benefit from what this community is offering, and how can I give back to this community some of my skills, some of my knowledge, and like maybe like grow together and like do something. So yeah, basically I would say that like since April or May of 2022, like in close touch with the Victory Drones community, and I have a strong feeling that this is one of the biggest benefits of the entire Ukrainian army, that we were building the solid communities within the armored structure, where people are able to kind of share their experiences, to share their knowledge, to and like set up some video calls with other folks and like and explain, and tell all the stuff and so on.
Interesting. Okay, so drones is very much similar to the open source like Kubernetes, but you know, 5 years later.
It's not like I don't want to have a feeling that it's kind of like the cargo code, where I just like kind of like copied and pasted my experience from the different stuff, but in some areas I feel that it's kind of like the same.
Gotcha. Interesting. And so how was your transition, or how has been your transition from the IT into the military has been going? Because, you know, territorial defense units are something fairly new in terms of maturity of the military units in Ukraine, right? It's a novel concept that I believe was introduced in January-ish area. Right.
It's kind of was like reintroduced, because the concept was in existence since 2014 or 15, but yeah, it was kind of reintroduced with the new structure. Again, like the territorial defense forces are now kind of like a subsidiary of the armed forces of Ukraine, and so on. So it's not like something paramilitary as before. It's more like it's the real army, but
Right.
with
It reports into the official
Yeah.
army structure and
to the
hence-
general staff and so on. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay. So how has that experience been for you to go from, IT and, very, I would say, very different
Yeah.
type of environment into the military? Granted, there's war going on, right?
Yeah.
This is not normal circumstances, but how's that been going for you?
Yeah, I would say that probably the fact that I joined the territorial defense forces is one of the one of the units of the armed forces of Ukraine versus joining the the old school army was one of the benefits there, because I would say that 95% of individuals who've been surrounding me, including officers, were those people who had zero military experience. And basically that was one of the cases where we've been growing and studying something together. It was not one of the cases where you yesterday you've been a completely civilian person, today you're joining the army and army destroys you or changes you entirely. So this was one of the cases where almost all of us, we have been civilians just yesterday, let's call it this way. And it was one of the cases where we had to develop and enhance our skills efficiently just for our own purpose and for just because we have to. And all these issues, especially that the Ukrainian army had at the beginning of the full-scale war, supplies with with the medical stuff, with even the wear and boots and all that stuff. So it was even more noticeable in the TDF, because it was the brand new structure, and probably not all the logistic processes have been developed and enhanced sufficiently at that point of time. But again, it's one of the cases where you can build something new and efficient within the currently existing structure, and you can benefit from some of the experience and some of the social network that you have built around all that stuff that you've been doing before the full-scale war. So, for example, with my own unit, just made a few tweets on Twitter back in March or April that hey, we're fundraising funds for basically some basic stuff for our unit, and some folks have decided to volunteer. Some folks from the officers community, so fully tech guys who are living in the United States, who have no direct relationship with Ukraine. They've decided to help the folks whom they know, and who are serving for the Ukrainian army. So this is one of the cases where basically we've benefited from all the social stuff that we have, and we've started crowdfunding and raising funds for again some basic stuff like the medical stuff, malware and so on. This is not something that we are looking for crowdfunding these days, obviously, because we're not at that stage of the war where you need everything, because at this point of time, luckily, the government so many things. But at that point of time, literally a few guys from my unit, they've been fleeing from Kyiv with their wives and their girlfriends. They've been basically helping them with passing the border in Poland. Obviously, those guys were not able to pass the border to Poland. They went back to Lviv, and they went to the recruiting office. And literally, they had just one single civilian suit on them, it was everything that they had. Yeah, that was it. And that was the purpose, we've been looking for at least some help from the community to provide these folks with some uniform, boots, for example, and something like this.
I'm just wondering, what's the kind of age makeup, right? You said men, families flee the war from east mostly, right, into the west to get to safety and perceived safety, right, and further get their loved ones to Poland and Europe. And it's interesting that they have right away, came back as, I mean, from border from Poland to back to Lviv, it's about an hour drive, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then, they went not just to kind of, back home or try to find a job. They went right away, like right to the recruiting
Yeah,
office,
right.
right? And that's what is it, what's the age makeup of the, territorial defense units? Was it mostly younger guys, or how does it?
No, it's totally different. I would say
Mhm.
like from 18 till 60.
Wow,
So like
18 to 60.
yeah.
That's a big span.
Yeah, it's a big span, and like there are so many people again like with the different experiences. We've been all doing something different in our past life,
Mhm.
but it's kind of like one umbrella that costs us these days.
Mhm. Interesting. Wow.
It also depends kind of like on the units, because like at that point of time when it was a common story when like not just me, but me and my friends, I'm calling my friends and my friends are calling their friends, and like we are kind of going to the recruiting office of the TDF and like trying to sign up just like together. So
Mhm.
we like draw common situations when like a group of people, they have signed up together and they're serving together, and obviously they like most of them are like kind of like the same age.
Mhm.
And my unit, in my first unit, before kind of like the restructure that has happened later. So most of the guys, like I would say that the average age there was kind of like 20 plus years.
Mhm.
So super young guys.
Yeah. How's the kind of, we were talking about the general maturity of the TDF unit, was pretty low
Yeah.
to start with. How have you seen it develop? I'm assuming it became a lot more mature in this 8 month of
Yeah.
war, right? And building. Was that mainly due to, like you were saying, crowdfunding and people personally trying to get things, or also from the government perspective as well?
Yeah. Well, so speaking about maturity, I would say that like we all have the same goal.
Mhm.
Basically, our goal is to end this shit on our land like as soon as possible, but as much efficient as possible.
Mhm.
And so if we want to do this, we have to work efficiently. We have to grow up our skills efficiently, and we have to move forward with this.
Mhm.
And this is how you kind of like you're maturing, like something that you would like the subset of skills that you would get in the civilian life, let's say in a month. In these conditions, you're getting them in a week.
Mm.
So the subset of skills that will require you of kind of like half a year of intense learning in the civilian life, it will take you kind of like three weeks, up to 3 weeks maybe to,
Mhm.
to get this subset of skills during the current conditions.
Right. So it speeds up the
Yeah.
learning
Right.
because you're focused,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
also you're motivated to
Yeah.
learn
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
get, educated and trained
Yeah.
and whatnot. So
Yeah.
if you're talking about those numbers, right, 8 months of current war is a lot of development, a lot of
Yeah.
growth, personal, but also as a military unit
Yeah.
wise
Right.
as well.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I wanted to open up for questions if anybody wants to jump in with anything that thought.
So many questions, but in chronological order, I'll just start with the first one. I'm fascinated to hear a bit more of what is it like to work in the command and control structure of the military in a kind of open source, kind of community sharing kind of way. Having never been in the military nor participated in an open source project, I'm very well qualified to pose this question.
Well, I'm not in the commandment of the military,
Okay.
so I'm probably not one of the guys who can answer this question directly.
But you operate, what I mean is like you're operating within a military
Yeah.
structure in
Yes.
a very kind of collaborative,
Yeah.
horizontal way. So how
Yeah.
does that play out?
Yeah, so it's complicated. It's from some angles. At the same time, like if you have enough kind of freedom of doing what is the most efficient for you to do, I'm not speaking about the full freedom because again, it's the military structure. We're not speaking about like complete freedom here. But if your officers, let's call them your bosses, your managers, they know that you may have some skills, you may have some experience, and you may do something that will benefit the life and the success of the unit. They will let you do it.
Okay. Thanks.
I wanted to highlight like what Dima started with. I think this is like the most important question that people ask, like who are interested in tech. Like it's not so how you got into tech, right?
Yeah.
And in your answer, you never mentioned formal education. So like
Yeah.
I assume most what you learned to get into the field, you learned on yourself, right?
Yeah.
And for drones too. Right, so twice in your life, like you took an initiative to get into IT, and then you took an initiative to learn drones, and it played out that at some point useful. So I think that's very beneficial for a lot of veterans who will be coming to civil life. That you are an example of somebody who learned the skills and then got the jobs, and then learned more on the job and progress. So not necessarily going through formal 5 years or master.
Well, if you have an option to go for the good education for 5 years, you definitely have to do it. So I'm not one of the guys who kind of dropped from the university and will tell everyone at university like the bullshit, so you shouldn't go there. So if you have an option of the good university, or your kids have an option of the good university, definitely have to do it. But again, like having zero formal kind of like, if you are not a bachelor in the computer science, for example, doesn't mean that you cannot be a good skilled person in this area.
And just to follow up, we've seen basically today for the first time posted the list of jobs in the military. It was done by some hiring company. It was widely shared today. But otherwise, like your experience was the first day of the war, you came, you knocked the door 3 times until they got you. But we know that more and more people will be enlisted or accepted within the months. So for the ones who anticipate at some point joining, what the way you recommend, and specifically for somebody who has a skill set like yourself, and maybe many in the audience who have some tech background?
Yeah, I would say, like from my experience, I would say that the best advice here, if you know something and if you'd like to benefit from your skills the most, and you're expecting to be enlisted at some point of time, probably the best advice would be to start making some connections with the active military personnel, and to eventually get directed to their unit. So it's basically to join their unit directly, not through the recruitment office, the military recruitment office, because like sometimes it may happen the recruitment office may kind of focus more on the papers and on the statistics rather on the efficiency. It's unfortunate to state, but sometimes it happens.
So it's almost like in real life when you're looking for a job.
Yeah.
Right. You would go check out, hey, I want to work for Google.
Right.
Well,
right.
let me, go find some people who work for Google
Right.
and ask them what
Yeah.
it's like to work for
Yeah.
Google, right? In a military situation, you're like, oh, well, I fly drones, so maybe I should go and check out Ihor,
Yeah.
right? And talk to them.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, something like that.
Very applicable in that respect. Okay.
Are there shifts within the army, like if somebody wants to start doing Ihor, maybe has some background, like can they move in?
How easily is
like
it to move?
inside of organization?
Yeah,
some units do what they want to do.
It depends. It depends on like where from and like where you are right now and where you will want to go. So it depends on like, but let's not forget that army is like an extremely complicated and like bureaucratic structure. So I would say that like it will be easier to go directly there where you'd like to serve versus trying to move between the major units. It's not so difficult to move between the minor units, I would say. But if you'd like to move from, let's say, TDF to, I don't know, like to special forces or something like this, like something like really big, it may take like a significant amount of time and the paperwork and all this stuff.
Very interesting.
And like what we always ask is how we we can help. So we have well, we are global Ukrainians, like some of us have tech skills or volunteering skills. But what would be the most beneficial ways of us to stay in touch, to be helpful?
I will pose this question to Dima probably. I would say that like the biggest benefit, like the biggest help that the regular person from the street can do is to start working with the local nonprofits that are supporting Ukraine. So it depends on the focus, like where you'd like to help. Maybe you may have some skills that you'd like to donate, and like you may run some trainings for some folks or something like this. Or maybe you have kind of like the good paycheck that you can offer to the nonprofit that will kind of benefit from this and distribute some of the services and the goods with the units and so on. So I would say probably the best advice is to work with the local nonprofits.
To build on that question a little bit and map it to open source audiences, many projects, there's like good first issues, different ways to find your way to a project and engage with that. Is there a similar way to navigate the charities and groups that are trying to help the Ukraine?
Well, so I'm not sure how, like, so if you'll find if you'll find an organization or a group or a nonprofit that is focused on Ukraine, and you don't know how to help them, like if you're looking for the good first issue, so probably some of the folks that are already working there and they experience there, so they may advise you something. So probably that's
Engage directly with the charity.
That's a great question in the sense that is there like a map of Ukrainian charities, right? Is what you're asking. And I don't have a good answer. I think that's an opportunity to develop something like that in that respect. But I feel like the answer could be very similar to what we were talking about. Hey, when you're looking for a job, find somebody who works with that company. When you're looking to get into the military, find something that you're interested in. Similarly, with the charities, reaching out to charity and finding out what are their priorities and how are they looking to accomplish them, what their vision is. Would be helpful as well. But that's a great question in that respect. I wanted to kind of shift a bit towards the future. And I know it's tough to predict the future, right? But like, what's your vision of, post-war, right? I don't think anybody here is questioning the fact that Ukraine's going to win. Right. But what does Ukraine look like post-war to you?
I would say that like it's so Ukraine is the country with the great towns and with the great potential, and we are exactly at that point of the Ukrainian history where we all can benefit from that. We even can benefit from this unfortunate war that is happening with us, but like if we convert the situation, that like the entire situation into something different and better, so we all can benefit as Ukrainians.
Okay. And I just realized that we haven't touched on, on Veteranius, right? The project that we've introduced, reintroduced as a new iteration. Veteranius was started back in 2020 to help Ukrainian veterans get reintegrated into the civil life and find a job in IT, right? And now we've done, I think, 4 or 5 iterations of these classes with different specialities, all the way from programming to cybersecurity, right, in the middle as well. And we have announced this partnership with the Linux Foundation to translate some of the classes. What's your view on that? How can Linux Foundation, but also maybe open source community, how can they help the project?
So first of all, just for the clarity, so Linux Foundation and Razom have partnered on like enhancing the Veteranius project and like kind of unfreezing it a little bit. And we are offering a couple of courses that have been available from the Linux Foundation for a while. They've been available in English for years. Now we're making them available in Ukrainian. So we're working on kind of like we finance this project, this initiative, and we're working on kind of translating and localizing them for Ukrainian, so they will be available later this year. And these projects will be available actually not only to veterans, they will be available to anyone who can fluently speak and understand Ukrainian. So you shouldn't be a veteran to get access to these courses. But these courses are kind of like the first necessary step for everyone who'd like to grow up in the tech, and who is the veteran and who'd like to move forward with some experience in tech, being a veteran. And let's say if we are speaking about the complex, like the Veteranius structure, there will be some mentoring sessions. There will be some more complex stuff where people will kind of like be in the same room and like we'll have the conversations on the same topics, more complex topics. There will be some mentoring stuff where the experienced mentors from the tech, from the industry, they will share the experience with less experienced people and so on. But the crucial and necessary step before that is that all the participants of this program, they have to have the basic technology. And by passing the online courses, we are kind of verifying and so on, so that these people have this knowledge.
Setting the stage. Right?
Yeah. So basically, you have to pass these online courses. They're not so difficult, but they're essential. Like, let's say intro to Linux. Like, you cannot grow in the tech these days without like any Linux knowledge. You have to know Linux. It may happen that you will not work with it, but you have to know how does it work, because Linux is powering, let's say, like 95% of the modern infrastructure around the globe.
Yep. Any other questions? So that
Actually I have like a slightly different question. So you were talking about like people going to recruitment offices and like signing up for the army. What about the like military industrial complex in Ukraine? Do people go and join them? So I think like a lot of people like in that community may be more interested in that.
Yeah.
And just like go and like build some rockets so we can finally hit like some targets in like in Moscow. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there isn't kind of like there's the well-polished procedure for this. So again, I would say that probably it's like the chances are higher if you'll have some direct contacts with the producers of something, and if they kind of like they may let you go to them as a soldier, let's say, or as an officer. Or they can, like, the option B can be if they will hire you, and if this company or organization they can kind of block you from being enlisted, so this can be something that may work. And probably the option B that I've just described is something that kind of like the most workable path.
I have a related question about the future, but not about the foundation. So you are a drone guy, right? And my back on the envelope calculations say that by now Ukraine probably has the highest drone operators per capita population in the world. So how are you going to lead that?
How can I what?
How are you going to lead that?
Lead?
Yeah.
Well, it's a complex question, but being a drone operator and being a kind of guy who's experienced in drones is not only like being in the field with the control sticks drone. So let's say you can be an instructor for other guys. You can be a guy who will share your experience with your unit or different units in that area. You can be you can work with the local developers and manufacturers of the drones, also sharing your experience from operating the commercial drones that are mostly widely used these days. And so there are tons of opportunities here, just kind of like they're not so visible from the street, for example, but if you are inside of the community, and this is one of the benefits of joining the community and being a participant of the community. So sometimes you might find that some people may look for something, and you may understand that you may have some experience or skills to to satisfy that need.
And like more on that, what were your expectations when going to US? Like who you wanted to meet? Like what were the subjects you wanted to discuss? And like what is your take home? Like what would you tell in US or in Ukraine about like how US is involved in helping Ukraine? Like what can be done more?
Well, so the primary and official goal of my US trip was to make it to KubeCon, to Detroit, where Dima and I would have presented at the keynote the Veteranius initiative, and basically we haven't just presented Veteranius itself, but we kind of pointed attention of folks of the audience of again like 7,500 people to Ukraine, and this was the most essential task here. So how can we put more attention to Ukraine, especially here in the United States? So it's not Europe, where like Europe may feel the kind of like the feeling of the war close to them. In the United States, it's probably a little bit different. So my expectation, like I'm not living here, so you can tell me more. But my feeling is that like US is like pretty far away from the war, and the United States is not so much affected by the circumstances of the war as Europe. So may happen that there are not so many people who are kind of feeling this as they should feel about this. If they're supporting them, they have to support Ukraine, but they don't do it, and so on. And this was basically like the primary goal of my trip here. Speak with people to kind of point their attention to Ukraine, to kind of like remind them that the war is not over. And yeah, it's like we are not in the same stage as we've been in March or April, let's say, where every single newspaper in the world was kind of like speaking about Ukraine and on the first page. So it's a little bit different these days, but from the real perspective, war is far from being over, and we definitely need the support from the West and from the US.
So for everybody listening, well, like we heard that we can check drones for victory, right? We can check Veteranius project. We can check Razom people. Any other resources you want to point people out to, like to stay in touch on Ukraine, on what you do on territorial defense?
Yeah, like basically point your attention to Ukraine, and that's enough. You'll definitely find some area where you like to focus on, and you like just don't ignore it.
And Ukraine still needs drones, right? And equipment.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, like people can go to Razom or other
Correct.
projects and donate, and they will be
Correct.
directly forwarded to your unit or unit.
Correct.
From your experience, so going back with the question Josh asked about how, so your experience of going to this conference, which is, a big IT conference, and after speaking on stage and going to talk to people on the floor, have you felt the support for Ukraine from people who came to talk to you?
Oh yeah, that's obvious. I mean, like there've been so many people who've been showing up after the keynote, and they've been just saying hi and telling some good words about the support of Ukraine. And I would say that like probably 40% of those people who have been showing up just in a whole have been those people I've seen at least for the first time in my life. So there've been some random people, not just my friends, so like all the family and so. The most surprising situation was probably in the airport in Detroit when I was leaving the city already. But two guys like with kind of like 15 minutes difference. They said me hi, and that like they heard our keynote, and they kind of like supporting Ukraine.
Awesome. So that was as you were flying from the KubeCon.
From the KubeCon, yeah, like it was like far away from the convention center. It was like
Right.
far away from all the KubeCon scenes. Just two random guys in the airport. Like we've been passing the security, and like one of them has been saying hi to me, and like and I love all the stuff.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Cool. Any other questions? I know we're approaching 6:30-ish time frame. Yep.
Yeah. So I have a question about open source community.
Yep.
Communities overall. So like obviously like open source communities are open to everyone.
Yeah.
Have you experienced like any like conflicts because of the war? Like some people may actually be on the like other side, and like how can we prevent the communities from fracturing and like to keep them on the like right side of history?
Yeah. So I haven't noticed anything similar with those communities where I'm involved into. One of the reasons behind this is just like I was not involved in the life of my open source communities, my kind of family open source community since the beginning of the war, because I was focused on something different. But you know, like in general, the cloud native community is so much welcome, and it's kind of like progressive enough with the smart people who understand what's going on in the real life, and I can't even imagine that there could be any conflicts with that background. But if something happens, it's one of the reasons why the solid open source community has to establish something like the code of conduct committee and the code of conduct itself. So basically, the formal set of rules that all the participants of the community they have to follow. In other words, it's like don't be an asshole to other, and that's it.
And is that code of conduct commonly exists, or are you talking about setting it up?
Yeah, so for CNCF, we use like all the CNCF projects. We use the CNCF code of conduct. It does exist, and it's been heavily inspired by the so-called contributor covenant conduct. So if you're building or if you're setting up the new community, the new community can be inspired from it as well. But again, like it's like the full world of open source projects, and not all of them are governed by some foundations as our projects that we have under our umbrella. Some projects may exist that are driven by one or two maintainers, and these maintainers might have different political views. So just be prepared that like everything may happen, because like people have their freedom and freedom of source and freedom of speech there. It just doesn't happen with our communities that are under the Linux Foundation and Cloud Native umbrella.
This is a good question. Sorry, I'll let you speak. But this just sparked my, thought about, well, Victory Drone is an open source community.
Yeah.
Does it have a code of conduct?
I don't like. It doesn't have kind of the set of rules listed on two papers, but in any case, there is a kind of like the periodic reminder from one of the admins in the Drone's chats, conversations, and so on, that like just be excellent to each other, and like don't be an asshole to your neighbor and so on.
Yeah. Agreed.
So kind of like it's kind of like self-regulating there.
Is there a way to ask questions online, like for those who are watching us online, or
I would see.
You're in the chat.
We're good.
Somebody will know.
Yeah, I can have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Also about the open source community. So there's like a lot of pressure, like a lot of activity going on to like just like pressure international companies to just like leave Russia.
Right.
What about open source community? So a lot of like Russian infrastructure is running on open source, including Kubernetes, including Linux, including like all the databases, everything. So including Russian government.
Yeah.
So people who are in Russia, like just like IT, like tech people, they keep using that. Is there anything like any pressure we can put on like through those communities to stop like helping Russian government to kill Ukrainians, for example, like to stop like Russian industrial complex for work? Is there like anything we can do?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit against the nature of the open source. So
That would be against the code of conduct.
Don't do evil is like famously and not like a free open source license.
yeah, I mean, like, so there is no way, I believe that there is no legal way to restrict kind of using the open source lines of code for just the consumption. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not one of the guys from the legal side of the house.
I'll bring up an incident, and maybe it triggers something. I think some folks in the community there's two incidents that come to mind. Someone had some opposing views
Yeah.
regarding women's rights,
Yeah.
and they were a maintainer on a project.
Yeah.
And there was some pushback from folks who were contributing to that. And then also Department of Defense also uses cloud native technologies. And there was at least a conversation that occurred in the community because folks had concerns about contributing to projects where it might end up in a fighter jet of some sort.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I wanted to see those two examples to remind to maybe trigger a deeper response.
Yeah, that's a great examples actually. So I forgot to mention that, but yeah, those are two great samples where like the nature of open source is being open, and open source tools, they should be available to everyone. At the same time, it's kind of like it's a little bit tricky and kind of like politically difficult to kind of like separate the purpose and the usage of this technology.
It's also fair to say that Russian government is somewhat paranoid about about running open source projects because they think that there is some backdoors or control over their infrastructure, and we're not going to convince them otherwise either, because that would be counterproductive.
Yeah,
But
obviously
they still
obviously those
because they don't have a choice, probably. They tried to develop their own operating system, and it was a joke. But
obviously there's a clear set of rules that there are no commercial services for those companies that are operating under the US law or the foundation, for example. So our foundation, we are the US incorporated foundation, we are also operating under the US law, so we are not offering any kind of services, as well as other commercial companies. They're not offering any services to the embargoed countries. So it's pretty clear. Just the question about like, can you use these lines of code for like running data centers in Russia, for example, or not? But without the commercial support, without all the stuff, it will be like extremely complicated to achieve some of that.
Yeah, that's what like I'm trying to figure out. And like it's obviously like we cannot prohibit like the open source license do not prohibit using it for evil. So it's just like you can do it whatever you want, but there's still like you can still put some pressure on people doing the development, like people doing like supporting this in Russia, as in like they are part of this community, and it's like we can like convince them. It's not like we are forcing them like somehow legally. It's impossible, but that's like convincing and like moving the whole community like away from supporting like Russia as like state sponsor of terrorism. Like we just like want to convince them that that's like a really bad idea to support it.
I don't
like, can we do this from the open source community, or should we just like use like regular means?
I think that it would not be technically feasible to do that, right? When you're supporting an open source project, you by default putting it into public's view to use. The only way to technically disable it is to just remove Russia's access from ability to access those open source repositories, right? And from what I'm hearing and seeing is that open source community generally supports Ukraine more so, right? It's just preventing Russia from using open source technologies is a more technologically difficult way of restriction than the political, because open source it's not a political project or neither should it be, right, in that respect. So it can't use a political pressure to prevent that.
Yeah, I want to build a little bit of maybe synthesize, which is the communities that are developing the software are in some way self-governed, and there's things like code of conduct that govern behavior within that community. As projects get used or things get prioritized that may have certain application, what you'll see is that the community will start to fracture, and therefore the projects will not survive. So these things that we've talked about help ensure a rich community that is building these projects that often come to commercial entities, the largest cloud providers in the world, or vendors that then commercialize those around those offerings for a bunch of reasons. And they're providing service levels and all that stuff. And then at that commercial layer, that's where the legal kind of export rules and regulations around these folks can consume these services, which is how most companies, especially as you get smaller, are going to want to consume these things as a service. So I turn it on and I turn it off, rather than, all right, is there these instructions don't work, and now how do I get this to work? And oh, there's a new release. How do I update this? Oh, there's a patch for something. So oftentimes these technologies are being consumed commercially. That's a way to block from an open source standpoint, contributor standpoint. That's where the community and its ethics and its code of conduct come to impact, progress.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank you for what you're doing, and I mean, it's really crucial and very important sometimes to see people, not only from Facebook. I'm not a tech person at all. I'm doing human rights and linguistics, but I work with people, and I remember my first 2014, 2016 when I was working volunteering in a military hospital in Kiev. But regularly I cooperated with regular army guys. So it's totally now new whole community now. Mostly civilians.
Right.
Joining the armed forces, which is also a novel concept for Ukraine. I mean, it's sort of. So I have actually two questions. First of all is, as far as I can understand, using drones and all these technologies is kind of like new generation of war.
Right.
A part of this infantry and airborne forces, etc. So I think it must be a lot of potential in this later to maybe share all this experience with the world. And probably we, when present Ukraine and draw attention to Ukraine, it's cool to point out that we not only ask for something like contribution and donations, but also we actually grew such an extent.
Right.
And second thing I was thinking about my experience from volunteering. I was reading a lot how not to harm guys and girls who were in the combat. I'm from Luhansk region. So, I mean, I saw the war, but from a civilian point of view. So it's totally different.
Yeah.
And now it's a huge community of civilians, smart guys joining army. Do you think people realize that they would need some support in terms of maybe peer-to-peer support of mental health things, and I'm not saying that everyone, but everyone. I need but I mean I'm pretty aware of this, but people can be really defensive when you talk about this. So and is it enough such support, or it's still people don't realize that they probably will need it or already need it? How do you see it?
I don't know. I can be pretty much defensive to this question because I probably don't realize this point at this point of time.
But at the same time, can you maybe share from your personal perspective what motivates, what helps you from your personal traits to deal with all this and to stay motivated, because we all know at different fronts are fighting. We are kicking out Russians from UN. Human rights council is also tough sometimes, but not I don't compare, but we all a bit tired sometimes, and we need this motivation because we understand it's gonna be long.
Yeah, well, so I would say that if you to be fully motivated, you have to do what you want to do, and this will be kind of the best motivation for moving forward. and from a personal perspective and from the personal experience, if I'm doing what I want to do, if I'm focused on the area where I'd like to be focused on, and so on. So this is kind of like the best in it also.
I think it's important to like brought it up, speaking a few words about it. Following up on what you said, like best way is to reach out to local volunteering organization. So specifically for this audience and volunteering organization we are affiliated with that organize this meeting, we have quite a few IT professionals that actually run some IT project that was born inside of the volunteering organization. So if you're a tech professional listening to this meeting, there are ways to contribute your skills, your IT skills, very valuable in building logistics, in business analytics tools, in accounting, all sorts of internal processes have to be tracked, analyzed, managed, to be transparent. So there's a lot of needed in brains and then professional skills in volunteering organizations. So it's not just packing packages. There's a lot of happening on the computer. So guys, if you have skills, check out Razom. We have a team who can point you to the right direction, how you can contribute to this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Razom4Ukraine.org. Google us or go directly, and you'll find the right contacts there.